finally Friday. It's Friday, Friday.
Thank God it's
Welcome back to the Friday Show, presented by the Match Series, which resumes July 13th at Delaware Park. It's the third day of this big event, which means some horses will be eligible for bonuses. Find out more at matchseries.com. I'm Scott Jagow, along with Ray Paulick. We're glad to have you with us. Ray, I've been glued to the TV this week, and I know you have, watching Royal Ascot, watching Frankie Dettori jump off horse after horse after horse. He won 4 in a row yesterday. Absurd. But just the whole event, it's just such a spectacular event. And in this year, when we've had so many shows where we're talking about bad things in the industry, we're going to stick to good things here and talk about what you like about Royal Ascot.
Well, it's the fashion, right? I mean, I just can't wait to get my Royal Ascot pajamas out so I can watch it in fine fashion. No, really, it's really hard to summarize Royal Ascot in just a few words. But for me this week, it was Frankie Dettori. This was a guy that 6 years ago had been fired by Godolphin. It had a drug issue, a personal issue, and was on some Big Brother celebrity TV show. And he was at a low point in his career. What he did this week so far is just phenomenal at the age of 48 years old. And when you look at that story woven in with all the great races, the names like Michael Stout and John Gosden and people who are so important to the history of the turf, you just want to package it and show it to everybody that doubts that racing is a great sport.
I agree totally. It is something where I was like, I wish everyone could see this, because I know not everyone's watching it from the mainstream public. So those critics and people who have been slinging arrows at the racing industry lately, there are great things about this business, and one of them is majesty and the majesty of the thoroughbred, and watching these big fields run over the grass, and they come home safe. And that's a big deal. They don't race on Lasix. That's a big deal. Those are positives that I think the U.S. racing industry can learn from. And I also appreciate the fact that NBC Sports has broadcast all of this. It presents horse racing in the absolute best light possible.
Yeah, with a partnership with ITV Racing, the coverage has just been phenomenal. The camera angles, just the manner of the post-race interviews, it's terrific, and it goes on network on Saturday. So hopefully more people will see it than on Saturday than will have seen it during the week on cable. The one thing that I really like about it versus our big days, our big festivals, is 6 races. They don't try to bombard you with 13, 14, 15 races like we do on our big days. When you think of Belmont Day, which is tremendous, 8 grade ones, it's almost too much. And when our biggest festival now is the Breeders' Cup. It's 2 days, 14 races, plus other races that aren't Breeders' Cup races. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe we should look at Royal Ascot as the model. It's a 5-day festival. I don't think the Breeders' Cup can stretch over 5 days, but we went from 1 day to 2 days. And maybe it's time to think about going to a 3rd day and put 4 or 5 races, Breeders' Cup races per day, along with a couple of other races. Don't keep people there for 12 hours or whatever like they do on Derby Day or Preakness Day.
I think that's a good idea. I do like that, especially the shorter time frame. With everyone's attention spans these days, and it's just it's exhausting. It really is exhausting to go from 10:30 in the morning to 8 at night. I'm watching these races. They start at 9:30 Eastern. They're over in about 3.5 hours. They have a sweet spot. There's about 35 minutes between the races, and the coverage helps because they do such a good job in between. And I think U.S. broadcasting, it's NBC Sports, so they're the ones that are doing it, and they do that as well for our big events. But they don't start broadcasting at 10:30. They start at like 2:30. So they're getting that shorter window, which is, I think, what we're talking about. Some of the other events in the U.S., like the Belmont Stakes Festival and even the Derby, have stretched out over a 3-day period, starting Thursday going to Saturday. But they still have 14 races on Saturday and like 12 races on Friday. I agree. I think it's all too much.
Yeah, the Belmont Festival, and they've been doing this for several years now, but it starts on Thursday. I don't think the last race on Thursday was over till 7:30 at night or something. And it's people love racing, but when they go to an event, they also want to have some fun around the event. And just judging from the people that are there, they have a lot of fun when they go to Royal Ascot. It's not just the time in the car park before the races themselves, and then singing after the races, which is a great tradition. I guess the mentality here is different. Let's milk as much as we can out of the people on track for the handle that we can get out of them, because we don't have that many chances. And I just kind of like what they're doing over there better. Yeah,
and I think with the Breeders' Cup, they talked this week about the Royal Ascot relationship with the Breeders' Cup, with the win and you're in races that are a part of the format. I just don't know how many of those horses are actually going to come over, because we've seen in recent years a lot of them end up going in the Arc or some other race in France in October, or Champions Day, which is 2 or 3 weeks before the Breeders' Cup, and that's their Champions Day, so they're not necessarily going to ship overseas. And I think the Breeders' Cup might want to think about making some changes otherwise, in terms of, it's called the World Championships. I get that, but I don't really consider it the World Championships, because we don't hardly get any horses from Australia, maybe a handful from Japan, some from Europe. But there are a lot of racing countries that aren't sending their horses over to compete because it conflicts with their scheduling. So if the Breeders' Cup were to move, I'm not sure exactly what time of year would be optimal, but look at it from a standpoint of the most important thing is the event. When I'm watching Royal Ascot, I'm not thinking about year-end championships. I'm watching great, high-quality racing with big fields. And when I even want to watch the Breeders' Cup, it's all about the horses and the competition and the quality of it, not necessarily who's going to win the division. You know what I mean? So I think the event is the most important thing.
Well, you have to remember that the Breeders' Cup, even though it's over 30 years now, it's still a new kid on the block. And when it was created, it needed some sort of branding, and the branding was the year-end championships. It's the Super Bowl of horse racing, because like you said, you watch Royal Ascot, you don't care about championships. You watch the Derby, you're not thinking who's going to be the champion at the end of the year. The Breeders' Cup needed a hook of some sort, and saying that this is our year-end championship made sense at the time to establish itself, and it's established now. And I'm not so sure you're wrong. I don't think they need to move the date, but finding the right spot in the calendar is increasingly difficult, because since the Breeders' Cup, in 1984, we've got festivals now in Hong Kong and Dubai. They're increasing the international participation in Europe and Australia in races. So I guess maybe it's a nice problem to have that there's so many of these, but the Breeders' Cup was created as a year-end championship, and that's still sort of the brand it has.
Yeah, I mean, the Melbourne Cup is another example of an event that is trying to attract horses from all over the world. So there is an increasing competition. I would say the Breeders' Cup should also think about, and we've talked about this back and forth for a long time, is a permanent host site. Would that be a better thing for racing? And you actually came up with the idea, why not Hialeah Park in Florida? Intriguing.
I'm not sure I'm the one that came up with it, but somebody mentioned it, and I kind of like the idea. Hialeah has this kind of mystique about it. It's sitting down there. It's a casino now, but it's also a racetrack. They only have quarter horse match races to keep their casino license. But before he died, John Bernetti put some money into restoring Hialeah. I've been there. It's still a beautiful, beautiful track, and it's totally unused. And I could see, with some tender, loving care and some significant investment, restoring Hialeah to a place that could someday be a host for a major racing festival, and the Breeders' Cup is the most obvious choice.
And Miami's right there with the international airport and the quarantine facility. And it's on the East Coast, which makes it better for the Europeans. Obviously, you couldn't move the event to the summertime because it'd be sweltering. But yeah, that's an interesting idea. But when we go back to the idea of 3 days, let's ask you. We have a poll on our website. Should the Breeders' Cup expand to 3 days and maybe stretch things out a little bit, not have 9 Grade 1 races on one day, but maybe stretch it out a little bit? The poll's on our website, PaulickReport.com. That will do it for this edition of the Friday Show, presented by the Match Series, picking up July 13th at Delaware Park. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.